subject of today's talk is 9/11. Interesting that a day and a series of events and one of the greatest tragedies in American history that took place on our own homeland is such a memory based on those two numbers. Let me give you a little history behind 9/11, because I don't think anybody believes totally in what they've heard. For instance, a commercial airline with a half a tank of gas crashes into the 107th story of a multi-thousand ton building and brings the building down to the ground with explosions and flames. And where in the world is this energy coming from? The fuselage of a 737? If you were to name the mastermind of 9/11 with all this kind of information, it's not likely that you would live a day. But I am safe from these things because I have a lot of power. And the studio that I'm talking to you from has been reluctant to bring the intelligence agencies into it, but it's impossible to discuss 9/11 without discussing the CIA. So for the first time since I've been at this location, I'm going to actually bring up the CIA because they are involved in many furtive and sometimes very dangerous events that they engineer. So going back in history, during World War II, before we got into the war, we were financing Adolf Hitler, because when you don't know who's going to win a war that massive, you want to be on both sides. So I don't have any problem with that. Hitler was getting his steel from Henry Ford, which is one of the most notorious anti-Semites in world history. Hitler loved Henry Ford, not just for the steel that he was providing him, but because of their mutual hatred of the Jewish people. There was a company on Wall Street called A.B. Brown that was run by a gentleman named Prescott Bush. You should know that the CIA buries itself among the securities firms. So many CIA directors have had a background in securities. That's where all the money is. And the CIA is always buried somehow and somewhere in some kind of a securities operation. So I can just tell you that they tried to suppress me from giving these kinds of talks and revealing this kind of top secret information to the general public. So one of the things that they did was they arrested me on 3 separate occasions. The first time they arrested me to put me in a psych ward in a military hospital for doing things like what I'm doing now. So under the guise that I was suicidal, the police showed up and the fire department showed up with an ambulance and a police escort. And to save me from committing suicide, they drove me 45 minutes in rush hour traffic to Holliswood Hospital in Holliswood, Queens, which is an Army hospital. There's a hospital just 3 blocks away from where I live in Astoria. And they could have put me in a psych ward there, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to put me in an Army hospital. At the time, the head of the CIA was General David Petraeus. He was a 4-star general and he was head of the CIA. Now I'm in a military hospital, an Army hospital in Holliswood, Queens, where they're shooting me up with Haldol, which is a drug from the 1930s which they treated paranoid schizophrenics. They gave me a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenic that carried throughout my life for many, many years. This was taking place in 2011. So we're talking about 9/11. So this took place in 2011, where they arrest me, put me in an army hospital, give me a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenic. These people are so crazy that you can't even give them eye contact. Generally, a paranoid schizophrenic will spend its entire life in an institution, but this is what they decided to do to me, to make me so crazy that nobody would ever believe me with regard to what I'm telling you now. So after they released me after 2 months, they figured that I would learn my lesson and stop trying to finance Black and Hispanic businesses and talk about my experiences with the intelligence agencies. But I continue doing what I do. This is what my life is about. It's about financing Black and Hispanic businesses through the securities industry. Well, in this country, you know, if you try to make millionaires and billionaires out of Blacks and Hispanics, you're going to be, by definition, an enemy of the state. So they arrested me 2 more times after that and put me in a psych ward at Elmhurst Hospital, which is in Elmhurst, Queens. Once on the 10th floor, and then another 2 months there on the 11th floor. So I spent 6 months of 2011 in psych wards with a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenic, trying to get out of the psych ward, putting me in padded cells, treating me like a lunatic, and making sure that this carried with me indefinitely, so that any kind of a speech like what I'm giving you now would be immediately laughed at. So that's the price that I paid. So after they released me from Hollywood Hospital in order to destroy all the original data and the basis of all of this, they knocked that building down. So Hollywood Hospital no longer exists. And then General David Petraeus went to Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts on Wall Street, which is the largest mergers and acquisitions firm on Wall Street. They do multi-billion-dollar deals. And the Kravis is Henry Kravis from my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was called Tulsa Town back in the 30s. Henry Kravis was the wealthiest person in Tulsa. He's an oil billionaire. He has his own wing at the Metropolitan Museum. And he's the Kravis of Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts on Wall Street, where he's, you know, financing businesses in the multi-billion-dollar range. So David Petraeus, General Petraeus, head of the CIA, went immediately to Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts to make sure that the CIA was going to be flush with money to operate all of their illegal programs, like the one that keeps me imprisoned. They can't kill me because they've attached everything to me. So they do the best they can to make sure that I am discredited, and all the while they're using my 500 square foot apartment with no air conditioning and no heat, and where everybody that's ever lived in the building is still connected to the building, and they do all these amazing things right in front of my eyes because they're running all of these different programs. So I'm there in the space where these are initiated, so I'm watching what they do. So they've made me like the new Tesla. I understand everything about electronics because I'm watching the most advanced electronics take place in my apartment. So they do things like when I walk to my favorite restaurant, I walk under a bridge, and I recall that, you know, I would walk under the bridge, which is lighted, and then when I walk under the bridge, and the lights go off under the bridge. So they're turning off the lights on a bridge. And then I would be walking by, you know, houses in my neighborhood, and then one by one the lights of the houses would go off as I'm walking by them. And now they're turning off the lights of the houses that I'm walking by in my neighborhood. So I see what they can do. I'm learning what kind of technology the intelligence agencies have that's all connected through me. So now I'm going to tell you who the world's most dangerous criminal is. Because when I was living as a multimillionaire from a wealthy family, my income in the early 80s was 25, 30,000 a month. I was driving a Porsche. I was living in a $500,000 condo, and I'm an average-looking guy. So now I'm kind of an elderly, average-looking guy. But when I was in my 30s, I looked like this. So no woman's gonna keel over, from looking at me. But when you're a multimillionaire and you got this kind of an income and you're driving a Porsche, then you can meet some fantastic women, and they'll like. I had a date with this 20-year-old Chinese model, and she wanted to marry me after the first date. So that's what I was experiencing. So that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore, because if I were to meet a woman now, the FBI would go to her place of business or her home or her church and say, this guy's a lunatic, he's out of his mind, he's a paranoid schizophrenic, and all kinds of terrible things. He's uneducated and adopted, and that's how they portray me, because I'm so dangerous with regard to what I know. All right, so this is about 9/11. I'm going to tell you right now that the most dangerous criminal on this planet is a guy named Larry Mizel. He's my first cousin. So when I was bar mitzvahed in 1964, he was at my bar mitzvah at Temple Israel in Tulsa. And when his son was bar mitzvahed in Denver, I was on the bima for the entire service, and the governor and the mayor of Denver were there, because this guy Larry Mizel is a multi-billionaire, and he's the most powerful Jewish person in the world, and they follow him as if he were the Jewish Messiah. Really, he's absolutely, unquestionably the most powerful Jewish person on this planet, Larry A. Mizel, in Denver, Colorado. He's a member of a congregation where you will find the Mizel Museum of Judaica. So when I lived in Denver, I knew what he was doing to me, and I was complaining to the Jewish community, and they didn't really care because they were all loyal to him. So his father was my uncle, my father was his uncle. We came here from Belarus in 1900, and we've been connected to the intelligence agencies ever since. And so when you're part of the foundation of the CIA and the NSA, they expect you to take orders from them, and they'll reward you with tremendous money and power. So I didn't go in for that. I was raised with money. I know what it's like to be rich, and I'm not going to sell the country down the river by attaching myself to intelligence programs that are bad for our citizenry. And so this is how 9/11 took place. Being rich and having access to capital is a very dangerous thing for Larry Mizel and the intelligence agencies. And when I insisted on continuing to try to finance Hispanic businesses in Denver, I was published in La Voz, expanded to Colorado, with an article that I wrote called Securities Markets Must Be Integrated. Then I wrote an article for La Voz called Affirmative Action. It was about affirmative action. The CIA was reading these articles, and they were saying to my cousin, you better stop this immediately, because now Hispanic Business is going to write an article about him, and they're going to put his picture in there. It's a how-to with regard to financing your businesses through the securities industry, because I'm a broker-dealer. And from 1985 until 1992, I had a company called Mizel Securities Corporation. I was a member of the NASD, and I have the expertise to run Merrill Lynch, and they know that. They know I have this kind of expertise. So back in 1991, The chairman of Merrill Lynch was a guy named Stanley O'Neill. He was the only black chairman that they ever had there at the largest securities firm in the world, because my whole business, my whole life has been about trying to empower blacks and Hispanics. I don't see why our citizenry at that cultural level should be considered anything less than equal. And now, over time, when I have come to understand who these people really are, I consider them in many ways superior. So this is my mission in life, and in order to keep me from doing what I wanted to do with my life, they just took all my money away. They stole all of my money, branded me as mentally ill, and at the end of it all, when my sister was living here in New York, I had to sell my car to have enough money to survive, living with my sister in her living room. My $500,000 condo was, I had to give that to somebody. I couldn't pay the mortgage anymore. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore at the Barclay. So the Barclay apartment where I was living in 1406 is now the Barclay Arena here. And 14 is Donald Trump's birthday is June 14th, and Larry Mizel's birthday is September 14th, and Larry Mizel sent his two children to Donald Trump's alma mater, the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia. So when the Richard Nixon experiment failed in 1973, which was the Army's attempt to exert a huge amount of control over our government, Larry Mizel was is a lifelong Republican, a total advocate of Richard Nixon. So when Nixon went down, they decided they would try it again with Donald Trump. So Larry sent his kids to Donald Trump's alma mater. Prescott Bush's company, A.B. Brown, was Adolf Hitler's financier. He was buying his steel from Henry Ford from A.B. Brown, Prescott Bush, who was financing Hitler, because it was before we got into the war and we didn't know who was going to win the war. So then Prescott Bush's son was George Herbert Bush, and so Larry became partners with George Bush. He brought Ronald Reagan to Denver in 1984 for a fundraiser for Reagan's second term. He was interested in George Bush. So after becoming connected to the Reagan-Bush administration, when Bush was running for president in 1988, Larry Mizel wrote him a check for $1 million, entered the executive branch of the government through George Bush, and then the CIA has been taking over America ever since 1988. And then when I complained and I devoted myself continually to financing black and Hispanic businesses, Larry Mizel started buying the most advanced surveillance equipment in the world and then attaching it to me. So at the end of it all, I'm assuming I have about 10 minutes left in this speech. At the end of it all, I had to sell my car in order to come to New York City and have enough cash to live on while I found a way to survive. So my car was a Porsche 911 Targa convertible, and Larry purchased that car. When I was living in New York, I got a call from Bill at Storz Garage at the intersection of Lincoln and Colfax in Denver. He owned Storz Garage. I sold him my Porsche. He called me up. He said, "Do you know somebody named Larry A. Mizel, chairman of MDC Holdings?" And I said, "Yeah, he's my cousin." He said, "Well, he bought your car." So 911 was named after my 911 Porsche Targa convertible, because the CIA loves cars, and Project Stingray, where they siphon every cell phone call in this country within a quarter of a mile. If you make a cell phone call within a quarter of a mile, they will pick up that call. They'll sweep up the call and store it away at NSA headquarters in Bluffside, Utah. That's called Project Stingray. named after Larry Mizel's Corvette Stingray. So 911 was named after my 911 Porsche. And the reason for 911, because if you have an idea that the government wants and it's going to expand the military, any way that you can expand the military, then the government's going to do that. Back before Pearl Harbor, we knew that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. But, rather than expose this and try to use political means to try to warn the public about it, the CIA decided to let it happen because they figured we got to get into the war. So we're going to let Pearl Harbor take place because that'll get us into the war immediately. We don't have to mess around with any politics. So this is how they think. So 9/11 was to pass the Patriot Act, to open 5,000 new offices for Homeland Security all over the world, because we have a defense budget that is beyond belief. You have to take the next 10 countries combined to equal the amount of money that we spend on defense. So the Secretary of Defense is Lloyd Austin, and this all began in 1971 when I was at the University of Texas in Austin. And I shined a laser beam on the Capitol Dome, and they took me off of data collection and put me on video surveillance. I've been under video surveillance since 1971. So then later on, I was still trying to finance minority businesses, and the only agency of the government that does that is the U.S. Small Business Administration. So they made their executive director Herb Austin. So we have 2 letters to Herb Austin, and then the oil companies were sending me letters from Austin, Texas, offering me money to purchase my oil and gas minerals, but they were all wrapped up in a trust fund. They made me mentally ill, or called me mentally ill. All my assets were wrapped up and put into a trust fund, and then the trustee's job is to make sure that I never get a nickel from my trust fund, and any oil company that wants to buy my minerals has to go through the trust, and then the trustee says, no, we're not interested. So that's how you keep me poor. Okay, so I figure I got about 5 minutes left, so here's the bottom line now. 9/11 was engineered by Larry Mizel. We have his leases on his fleet of jet aircraft that match up exactly with the 737s that crashed into the towers. We have his derivative trades because the market was open on 9/11. They were oversold by a factor of 600%. Larry Mizel owned puts on United Airlines, made $17 million, killing 4,000 people on 9/11. We have his leases. We have his derivative trades. We reported this to a member of the House of Representatives. We reported this to a person who worked at J.P. Morgan Chase, because I was giving information to banks. So I gave all this information about what they were doing to me to a guy at J.P. Morgan Chase. So then they took his name, John Rodriguez, and then made him Lieutenant John Rodriguez to investigate the 9/11 tragedy, which they created themselves. The 2 airplanes that crashed into the towers, the Saudi Arabian pilots were captives in those planes. This had nothing to do with Muslims at all. This was a CIA operation named after my car. The Saudi pilots were trapped inside the planes. The planes were on autopilot, guided into the towers. There were bombs on every other floor. The bombs in the basement of the buildings were going up before the planes ever got there. This reporting by the New York Times was never really allowed to see the light of day, because you can't go against the CIA. They'll kill you. The person that reported about the CIA, a guy named Mike Rupert, who gave a speech at Portland State University, they shot him in the back of the head, called it a suicide. A guy named Gary Webb, who was the focus of a movie called Kill the Messenger. Same thing with him. They shot him in the back of the head, called it a suicide. If you spend your time and you spend your life exposing the intelligence agencies, you're not going to live for 1 minute. So I guess I have a couple of minutes left. So I have 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to just tell you the bottom line here. 9/11 was organized to create 5,000 new offices for Homeland Security. The United States has 800 military bases in 172 countries all over the world. We spend half of every tax dollar on the military. Nobody can touch our military. It's just beyond defeat. But the only way that you can take over America is internally, and that's what's taking place now. The CIA, the U.S. Army, is attempting to take over the United States of America. They're trying to take over the states individually through the Trump insurrection. They've taken election deniers and made them heads of voting programs. We have 3 Supreme Court justices now that came from the Federalist Society. This is a all-out attempt by the U.S. Army through the CIA and the NSA and the FBI to a certain degree, and the Secret Service to a certain degree, to take over the United States of America. This is the end of American democracy, the great American experiment where we have rights for every citizen, everybody's equal in a voting booth. It's the greatest idea in the history of mankind, American democracy. It has always been tested. We've gone through many tragedies and events to try to preserve our democracy. The state of Israel now, where Bibi Netanyahu was installed by Larry Mizel, Israel has no democracy anymore. The attack by Hamas was engineered by Israel to make sure that Bibi Netanyahu will be head of that country and head of the military indefinitely. So Israel is no longer a democracy. The Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence agency there, CIA, which is operated by the smartest people in Israel, gives orders to our CIA. So the Mossad, which is a brilliant intelligence organization in Israel, now working for a country that has lost its democracy, is now giving orders to our CIA as they attempt to overturn our democracy and turn America into something that would be run by a dictator like Donald Trump. He's giving speeches now that sound exactly like Hitler. Donald Trump sounds exactly like Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, and they're afraid to arrest him because they're afraid it'll set off riots in the street, which it probably will. So the bottom line is, who's Donald Trump talking to? He's not afraid to sound just like Hitler. And who's his audience? I mean, aside from all the white supremacists and fascists that are part of our citizenry that are now not afraid to come out with their, anti-Semitic rhetoric, and they're anti-black and they're anti-minority. They're all for white people. Donald Trump is talking to the army. Donald Trump, his speeches that sound just like Hitler are being orchestrated and aimed at U.S. Army. And this is the biggest attempt in the history of this country to overturn our democracy and turn it into an autocracy because, simply speaking, American democracy has been too successful for blacks and Hispanics, Asians, and other minority groups. They're achieving power, they're being elected to Congress, we're going to have a woman president, and they're trying to nip this in the bud right now. Our system is so superior that you can take an idea like democracy and make it a reality in the most powerful nation in the world, and that's what they're trying to put an end to, and I'm trying to keep that from happening. So I want to thank you for listening. I want you to be skeptical about our intelligence agencies. I think it's very dangerous now to be supporting the Republican Party, which is no longer really interested in our Constitution at all. They're interested in power for white people, white men. So I'll just leave you with this last statement. Larry Mizel's entire business career is about white men, and they created a person to be his partner, Oprah Winfrey, who's a black woman who brings in women and minorities. So that's his partner. That's the story. Good luck to you all, and thanks for listening.